What does the summer have in store, and can we really predict anything beyond about 5 days? These are the two questions that I get asked most frequently at this time of year, and we're going to try and answer them in this week's Met Office Deep Dive. The more observant amongst you will have recognised that I'm not alone this week. We're doing things a little bit different. We have a special guest. Will, welcome along. Thanks for joining us. Do you want to tell everyone what your role is here at the Met Office?
Hi Alex, my name's Will Lang. I am Head of Situational Awareness. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, it means that I'm in charge of weather warnings, but also briefing government departments and other contingency planners. So people need to look ahead about the weather, government departments, businesses, etc. I run the team that does that in the Met Office.
Right, excellent. And Will is here to help me, basically, because this is a big subject that we're talking about this week. In this week's Deep Dive, we are looking at the next 3 months, the 3-month outlook, which takes us through crucial months of June, July and August, which meteorologically, climatologically, depending on how you look at it, is summer. So as meteorologists use the seasons in 3-month chunks. So June, July and August constitutes summer as far as the Met Office is concerned. You can measure summer however you want to, but that's the way we do it. To keep the statistics even, it makes more sense for us to do it that way. So don't write in and complain about that, but do put your comments in the chat. We'd really love to hear if you've got any comments. As I say, we're doing it a bit different this week, our deep dive. So again, put your comments in the chat and please share, please hit subscribe and hit like if you are enjoying what you are hearing. But we're basically talking about the longer range, the contingency 3-month outlook. And we're doing that because it's been published today, Tuesday, the 30th of May. The contingency 3-month outlook is available on our website. And it's showing some quite interesting things as well. So Will's here to pick it, to go through it in detail, and perhaps we'll start with why and what the 3-month outlook really is, because, as I say, it goes on our website. It's important to note that it goes on our website every month. We don't just do it for the seasons. We update it every month, don't we? But it's an outlook. It's not going to tell people exactly what the weather's doing on a certain day in the middle of August.
Exactly. This is fundamentally different from our normal weather forecast. As we all know, normal weather forecasting is difficult. Seasonal forecasting, doubly so. So we have to look at it in a different way. So it's about models and it's about drivers. The models are essentially the same models we use for day-to-day weather forecasting, but because of the chaotic atmosphere, because of the massive amount of uncertainty on longer timescales, we have to look at the outputs in a slightly different way. And that's where we come up to seasonal forecasts, where we look at the outputs from lots and lots of different models run both here in the Met Office and other forecasting centres around the world, see what they're telling us for the next few months, and we also consider the drivers in the atmosphere. So what are the big, large-scale things that are going on? What are the things that correlate to a hot summer in the UK, for example? Are there any patterns that we can spot? And there are usually patterns. At any time of year. Sometimes they have a strong correlation with what happens in the UK, sometimes they don't. Often in summer it's fairly weak, but there are some hints there. So we look at that in tandem with the models. As you said, Alex, it's not going to tell you whether it's going to rain where you live on a particular day in summer. Not at that range. That would be unrealistic at this stage.
Yes, so if you are watching, you're getting married in August, this isn't going to tell you what the weather's going to be like on that day. If you have tuned in to the deep dive and wanted to know how long the high pressure is going to last, well, we're not going to cover that in this week's either. So just to warn you have to watch the 10-day trend tomorrow for that. But if you hit subscribe, you won't miss that either. So we are just concentrating on this 3-month outlook, this longer range forecast. And Will's here to help explain a few things, and I guess the first question is why bother? So we do the day-to-day forecasts that help the public, that tell people when they can go outside and enjoy the beach, and then there's obviously our climate models looking at climate change. This sits somewhere in between that. But why? What is the point if it's not that useful to people?
Yeah. So. Normal members of the public, well, you or I, for example, we're not going to make big decisions about when to go on holiday or when to have an outside event in the course of summer based on this seasonal forecast. But there are other people and organisations and government departments, it can be really useful to know what to plan for. Even if there's a slight chance of something hotter than normal, colder than normal, wetter than normal, it is worth being able to factor that into your planning, especially when you have lots of other risks going on in your organisations, other factors, the economy, etc. Right. And factoring that in and being able to quantify it with numbers, that can be really useful.
Okay, so it's for governments, utility. I mean, that's a good example, isn't it? So people can plan, or power companies can
Energy
can
supply
plan.
and demand. So one thing we look at is is it going to be windy or not, for example? And again, that has an effect on electricity supply. Temperatures have an effect on electricity demand, etc. So this kind of subtle information that we can give about shifts, trends in probabilities, etc., can be really useful for people looking on those kind of scales, really.
Excellent. So it's based on probabilities as well. So it's based on the likelihood of trends happening rather than
right.
rather than
so we're not going to give
days.
definitive numbers. You're not going to pin down a particular location, and we're just going to talk about chances, and it's chances relative to a kind of normal as well. And actually, how we define normal is a really interesting case as well, and that requires probably a bit of explanation as well.
Yeah, and that's the climate we're basing that on. So that's over a 30-year period that the average is taken from.
So we pick a relatively recent 30-year period. We're currently using 1991 to 2020. We look at all of the summers during that period.
Yes.
And we split them up into categories, really. And the warmest 20% of those we define as that being the hot category. The coldest 20% during that period, the cold category. And then the rest in between, the middle 60%, that represents near average. And that's how we define those terms, actually.
Right, okay.
And that sets our baseline and our reference point for the current seasonal forecasts.
So it's compared to that climate period of 91 to 2020.
Yeah.
Like you say, 60. The middle 60% would be average.
Yeah.
The top 20% would be above average,
yeah.
warmer than average if it was temperature, and the bottom 20% would be cooler than average.
Yeah,
and
so it's that 20, 60, 20 is what we're looking for.
That's really important to get that across. And we only really look at these three things, don't we? And wind's quite a recent addition to it. So for most of the time recently, we've only done temperature and rainfall, but now we've added wind into that.
That's right, and that's particularly important in winter. When we can have really windy conditions in winter, not so much in summer, but as I said, it can be a factor in things like energy generation, and so really useful to know.
Excellent, and as I said, we've already said it's done every month, but obviously we're looking at this one specifically at the moment because it covers those crucial months of June, July and August, which meteorologically is classed as summer. Okay, so that's what it is and why we do it, because as I say, it's useful for planning and for governments and for utilities. You hinted at it earlier as well when we talked about drivers. What influences our weather other than whether it's sunny or whether it's rainy or low pressures and high pressures affecting the UK? What can influence the UK?
We can have influences on the UK weather from all around the world, and we've probably heard about the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
But there are larger scale things that go on that can have an effect on UK weather, and there are patterns in the atmosphere that we look for that give indicators of what might influence our conditions over the next 3 months in summer in particular. So one of the things that we look at is El Nino in the Pacific.
We've had a few questions on that before, actually. People often ask, because they've heard that El Nino is happening, what are the influences on the UK weather? What does El Nino mean for the UK? So let's look a little bit then at El Nino first of all. Let's touch on that. And when we're talking about El Nino, let's take the jet stream off. Let's take the pressure pattern off, because we'll just go to. We're not even talking about the UK, are we? We're talking
so this
about
is one of the amazing things about the weather, that it can be influenced by things that happen across the other side of the world, and not just in the atmosphere. Actually, the temperature of the sea.
So it's the sea surface temperature on the other side of the world that warms up, cools down naturally, a natural variation that happens every few years.
Yep.
And for the past couple of years, past 3 years, in fact, we've had a La Nina, which is when the sea surface temperatures down here are cooler than
It can
average.
be cooler, probably warmer on the other side of the Pacific, but this area here where we measure, it'll be cooler than average.
It'll be cooler. But what we're going into now, and what this graph shows, is that El Nino is likely to happen, or is starting to happen. Things are switching.
That's right. So again, this is sea surface temperatures in that region of the Pacific relative to normal. So again, it's versus normal.
So 0 would be normal.
0 would be normal. So this goes up to the end of last year here and into the beginning of this year, and the sea surface temperatures were below normal in this area of the Pacific. So this was still La Nina conditions. Oh, sorry, I pressed the button there.
Sorry, it's a very sensitive screen. It's good. There we go.
There we are. We've got it back. And what we're seeing here is that we've seen a transition over the last few months to going above that 0 baseline into positive anomaly, so higher than normal sea surface temperatures. So this is where we are now.
So the blue dots are where we are. They're observed. That's what's happened.
That's what's happened.
And what are the red lines
So we are
here?
on the cusp of something developing here. And this is our projections. So these are the outlooks, the forecasts for the coming months up and away until October. And you can see there's probably a large range of variation in the different models, but all of them are on an upward trend to an extent. So this is a developing El Nino situation. So looks like it's probably going to get stronger and stronger throughout.
And that's quite a strong signal, would you say? Because often they're all, I've seen these graphs before, and they kind of when it's fairly neutral,
it can still be going down. So
there is
consensus that an El Nino situation is developing. Exactly how strong that will be is open to question. That's where all of that uncertainty lies.
Of course. So that's developments in the South Pacific, and this graph kind of shows why that's important, because this is showing temperatures over the recent decades in El Nino years versus La Nina years. And the white line is the global temperature. And actually what you can see here is that every blue year, a La Nina year, there's a dip. And pretty much every El Nino year, there's a jump. So when we have El Nino, the global temperature, air temperature, tends to be higher. So that's an important factor. Mm-hmm. Also, El Nino influences other things, not just temperature, but around the world, El Nino can increase rainfall in certain parts of the world as well.
Right, so in some areas of the year, particularly in some areas of the globe, particularly in the tropics, then El Nino, or in fact La Nina, can have a big effect on influencing the forecast in the short term and the outlook for the season, for example. When you get towards what we call the mid-latitudes, which is where we live in the northern hemisphere, that's less clear. Okay. So actually the influence of a developing El Nino on the UK this summer, probably very marginal, if anything. So it's not really a big player.
Not really a massive player in our summer forecast, just something that you look at.
It is one of the drivers that we consider, see how strong it might be, and in this case, it's not a big one. Really.
Probably
there are others, so we move on to our other list of
what could affect our weather. And just a point on that as well. Again, thanks for all your questions. We probably will look at El Nino and the effects that it does have on UK weather at different times of the year in another deep dive. So please do keep your questions coming in. But this is specifically about summer. So for summer, just kind of not ruling out, it doesn't have completely zero effect, but there's very limited effects that El Nino will have on our summer. But something that could have an impact on our summer is this map. So do you want to describe what this map is? So just point out, because it's might not be that. That's North America, the grey there, and that's the UK up there. What's this showing?
So this is a current map of sea surface temperature across the North Atlantic. And again, this is presented relative to normal. The colours are defined relative to that. And really, the reddy, orangey colours means above normal.
So the sea is warmer than average here and quite a bit around the UK.
Right, so there are a few areas
cooler than average.
Up here, a bit cooler than average. But actually, the majority of the North Atlantic is warmer than it normally is at this time of year. And that includes the bit going up into the UK as well. Why does that affect the UK?
Why does that impact the UK?
Because we're an island, and most of our weather has to come across the sea, and if the sea is slightly warmer, it can heat the atmosphere.
Okay.
So it gives us a little bit of an extra boost, I think, in terms of temperatures for a start as we head into the summer. So this might well be a more significant factor for us.
And that's a snapshot. So this is current sea surface temperature, but the sea actually doesn't change temperature very rapidly, does it?
Not very rapidly. It can become a little bit mixed up if you have a big storm come along, but obviously that is less likely at this time of year anyway.
So
this trend is likely to continue.
Yeah, so it's likely, even though it's a snapshot for now, this isn't a projection, but that is quite a significant thing, that the sea surface temperatures around the UK, and often where we get our weather from, are above average, and quite significantly above average. We're somewhere between 2 and 4 degrees generally around the UK. So sea surface temperatures are above average around the UK. That can play a part. So we know that, and then there are other drivers that have limited effect on the UK, but we also then rely heavily on the computer models.
Yes, so we can look at what the models are telling us. And again, it's not going to tell us whether there's low pressure or high pressure across the UK on a certain day. But what we can do is look in very low resolution and averaged over a whole period and thinking, where is the average position of high pressure. What is the average pressure for a point around Northern Europe, for example? So we can look at the large-scale pressure pattern and tendency, really, across that whole area.
How it's varying. And that's kind of where we are here. So this is kind of the first projection, if you like, that we're talking about. This is what's coming out of the computer models for, says up there, JJA, which is shorthand for June, July, August, isn't it?
So you can see the blockiness here. So we're looking on large scale. So we're used to looking at weather models which have tiny sort of 2 kilometre resolution.
And is that because they're running? Is that because they need a longer time? Is that because you need a lower resolution to do these longer term projections?
It's partly that, and also because we've got so much information, we need to average it all together.
Right.
And it's very noisy. And if you try to look at this at high resolution, it would be a bit of a mess, to be honest.
Okay.
So you've got to take a step back and almost squint,
Squint your eyes.
Squint and say, what are you telling us on the broad scale, large scale patterns here?
And
that's when the patterns emerge. So again, these are relative to normal. So this is your average pressure over that whole period. So again, not what the pressure pattern's going to be on a particular day, so don't read that too literally. But it's saying that overall, Northern Europe, Scandinavia, the far north of the UK, pressure will be, throughout that whole period, more likely to be above average.
Higher than average pressure.
Higher than average pressure.
And the blues?
Conversely, lower than average pressure down towards Spain, Iberia, etc., parts of the Mediterranean.
And again, I mean, I've seen these charts before. This strikes me as being a lot of the time you see these charts, and you really struggle to pick out much of a pattern. But this strikes me as being quite a strong pattern.
It's a really useful signal, actually.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we lie on the middle bit, where it's a bit more wishy-washy. It could go either way. But what you can do then, and this is where you can apply your forecasting principles, is that you can imagine that there's a big high pressure
area. Well, let's do
here.
that. Let's see what it might look like. So this graph is basically kind of showing us, if we can get the is that high pressure is more likely up here.
Yeah, and it's not going to be there all the time.
No, that's not a set position.
On average, there is a circulation.
So if you imagine if you've got high pressure here, and then it was down here,
there,
you've got your low pressure dominating across Iberia, and then of course the winds go around high pressure clockwise and around low pressure anti-clockwise. So it does increase the chances of winds, not necessarily coming from the south, but from the east, but reducing the chance of winds coming from the west.
Yeah, so you can apply your again, back to basics forecasting principles here and think, where will that wind be coming from on average? Right, and so it is indicating that on average, winds might come from a slightly warmer continental direction. I mean, we've said the seas are warm, but actually the seas are cool relative to the land in the middle of winter. So it's coming, it's summer, sorry.
Yeah.
So it is coming from a warmer direction. So that might imply that we might see warmer conditions across all of these regions relative to normal.
Yes. Right? You should have stressed that. So the land mass, this large body of land to the east of us, heats up faster than the sea in the summer. So in the summer, this is a source of warmth, whereas the opposite is true in the winter, of course. If this setup were in the winter, if we were forecasting this for the winter months, people would be getting very excited about the potential for
we're only
cold
a very
snowy.
small land mass, and so a lot of our heat has to be imported from elsewhere, which is where this heat is.
So with that setup, the more likely winds are coming from the east or the south.
Yeah, not all the time, but overall.
Overall, hinting that on average it will be warmer than average. And it's crucial that the low's close to the south, isn't it?
Right, so low pressure, that's where you get most of your rainfall from. High pressure, the air is descending, tends to have less cloudy skies and less rainfall.
We've got it at the moment. High pressure, the air is descending.
Right.
So.
But this is where the rainfall is. And again, on average, it will be closer to the south of the UK than the north of the UK. And you can imagine at times that there will be a low pressure system down here that will extend itself up into southern areas at times. So what we're saying is that overall, there is probably a greater tendency for wetter conditions across the south of the UK relative to the north of the UK.
So
we're all in that zone, though, where it's a bit,
a bit wishy-washy,
could
fairly
go either
neutral.
way. But so we're not saying, that it looks like it's going to be particularly wet or dry at this stage, but actually, relative to
there's more of a tendency
across the UK,
wetter weather,
that's it,
than average across the south, and also. people are going on holiday to Spain and Portugal, it doesn't necessarily mean that
absolutely not. No, there will be plenty of fine weather.
There will still be a lot of fine weather, but perhaps more showers than usual in that.
That's
area.
right. So even just looking at that initial graphic of the pressure pattern and actually doing this little bit of forecaster thinking that we've just been doing, it enables us to come up with a rough idea of what's going on.
Yeah.
And you'd think that would come out in terms of the shifts of probabilities relative to that normal that we were looking at.
And then another thing that we've again, these are the projections going forward. This is based on the computer models, and this is showing us the temperature projections.
And this should now be no surprise based on what we've just seen. So we said that the continental warm influence is spreading up towards the UK. So you wouldn't be a surprise to see this area being warmer than this area, for example, where the air mass is coming from, from the North Atlantic, for example.
Yes.
So that's no surprise. What is probably a bit of surprise is that this whole area is warmer than normal.
Yeah.
Now that needs some explaining.
So just to clarify, this is the temperature now. So this map is showing the 2 meter temperature, is it? Yeah. The 2 meter temperature. So that's where we measure the temperature basically at the surface, and the oranges are above normal, and quite a high percentage above normal there across the UK. Those orange colours, and actually even Scandinavia, it's still above average. There's no blues on that chart, so pretty much everywhere across Europe is likely to be above average over that 3-month period. But the UK is in the darker reds there, slightly even higher.
And this is where it gets confusing as to what we mean by average and normal, because this is relative to that longer historical period.
Yes, okay.
That was something that happened in the past, and actually our climate has changed since then.
Right.
So actually a lot of this, and this is not abnormal. This is kind of normal.
This is
what you look at. Probably in most given months, actually, there is a warm signal coming out of all of the models for the next few months, and that's what we see in reality as well, because the climate has warmed a little bit, but significantly so since that 30-year reference period.
So that 30-year reference period, that 91 to 2020, but actually we know that the climate has warmed in that period. So even though you take that average, which starts in the early 90s, takes that decade of the 90s, the 20s and the 2010s, but we know that our climate has warmed since then, so actually that average is not necessarily the average that we are now.
Yeah, that's perfectly right. And so there is already, if you like, a new normal.
Yes, so it would be surprising if there was blue on the chart.
And it's very difficult to get
that in these days because everything's been shifted. Yeah. So one of the biggest drivers for the predictions for any 3-month period is the fact that our climate is warming.
Yeah, and that can really represent a challenge to how we communicate the forecast as well and get that message across.
So it's likely to be warmer than that average period. It's likely that higher pressure is going to be, generally speaking, on average to the north, and low pressure to the south, suggesting maybe a higher chance of some rainfall in the south, more than average. Let's take a look then, the big kind of reveal about what the 3-month outlook for contingency planners is actually showing. We've broken it down here. This is what it looks like on the website, and this breaks it down into the 3 main things that we look at, which is temperature, rainfall, and wind, and based on the computer projections and all those drivers that we look at as well. And I guess the top one is the big headline one, right?
And that should now be not a surprise to anyone, based on what we've talked about,
based on what we've been through.
So we are seeing a reduced chance of it being in that cool category over the course of the summer. 50% chance near average, which is about roughly near the 60%. But that 45 is way greater than the 20% we would see relative to that, to that 30-year period. However, that is not inconsistent with what we've seen for recent years as well, and a lot of that figure does reflect that warming climate. So let's not get running away with this here.
And still, the most likely scenario, so the 50% chance, which is the most likely of those 3, is actually that temperatures are going to be close to average.
Absolutely, and it could still be cool. It's really unlikely, 5%, but it could still happen. So all things are still possible, and it's just that subtle shift of the odds, really.
So a 45% chance, and that 2.3, that's 2.3 times the chance compared to normal, but that normal, again, is that 90 to 2020 average, and because we've shifted those things, that again isn't a surprise to see
so
that.
the same forecast at this time of year from recent years have always been roughly around 40%, so that's what we expect under the climate.
Okay, and in terms of rainfall?
really finely balanced. So it could go either way. As I said, we're in that zone in the middle where it's finely balanced between the prevalence of low pressure to the south and the higher pressure to the north, and exactly where that will be and where it will affect the UK as a whole. So at the moment, it's pretty similar to that 20-60-20 distribution.
So there's not a strong signal.
Not really a strong signal. We can make some useful statements around that north-south distribution, which are useful to some planners, for example. But otherwise, there's no strong signal for it being either extremely dry or extremely wet, which isn't to say it's impossible. It's just...
And of course, one thing we haven't talked about is regional variation as well. Now, this is an averaged over the whole of the country for the whole of the season. You're going to get variation like we have at the moment. We've got a big area of high pressure across the country at the moment. It's really warm. Well, it's not really warm, but it's warmer than average in the west, and it's distinctly cooler than average. But actually, when we look back at this week, it will probably be classed as an average week in terms of temperature. But if you're in the west, if you're in Western Scotland at the moment, 25 degrees is well above. But you're still going to get those regional variations as well.
Absolutely. So we're not attempting to do that. There are some occasions, for example, the north-south thing with rainfall, where we can attempt some regional detail. But actually, again, if you're looking for a postcode level forecast or anything like that, you're not going to get it from any of these.
And finally, say the relatively new wind forecast.
Yeah, again, it's not really telling us much at this time of year. It's not usually a windy period anyway compared to winter. Slight prevalence for near average conditions. Again, not a great deal of information, but the fact that it's probably neither... The chances of it being extreme either way are useful to some of our customers.
Excellent stuff. And I think that headline will be that top one. There'll be a lot of interest in that and a lot of conjecture around what that actually means for our summer. So it's really good to get that detail from you, Will. Thank you very much for being on the deep dive today. Thank you all for watching. Please do keep your comments coming in. If you've got anything else that you'd like us to discuss on the deep dive, any further questions, put them in the chat as well, and Will and I will try and answer them. We might bring Will back maybe for the autumn or a winter forecast as well. Have you enjoyed yourself?
It's been a pleasure.
Good. So it's great to have Will. Big thank you to Will. Big thank you to everyone for watching. As I say, please do keep your comments coming in. Do hit like if you've enjoyed it, and please also subscribe, and then you won't miss any of our day-to-day forecasts, because that's where you find out what the weather's actually going to do over your head in the short term. And if you are interested in how long this area of high pressure is going to last, that's keeping us largely dry this week, then watch the 10-day trend tomorrow. I will be producing that this time tomorrow. So as I say, that will be on our YouTube channel as well. But thank you very much for watching this deep dive, and we'll see you again soon.